Hello everyone, and welcome. Thank you for coming. My name is Kendra Larson. I'm the director of Art Gallery, and I'm the Clark Arts Talks coordinator. Today we are very lucky to have the wonderful Marne Lucas here to do a talk. Marne Lucas is a queer, multidisciplinary artist based in Portland, Oregon, whose practice spans photography, video, sculpture, and collaboration. Lucas works at the intersection of art, feminism, and health, using conceptual overlap. Life's energy, intimacy, the body, mortality, and transformation. A self-taught artist, Marne's investigations are informed by the events and emotions of the community around her, and inspired by the Dharma art and social practice movements, social activism, and the End of Life Doula and palliative care movements. Framed by a personal mythology on the meaning of creativity, Lucas has collaborated with artists, choreographers, dancers, musicians, art directors, activist groups, sex workers, healthcare, and LGBTQIA nonprofits, and the public at large. I'm very excited about this, everybody. I've known Marne for a while, but I have never heard her speak about her work. So I'm really, really excited, and I think that our community is really lucky to have her here today. This is going to be recorded, and you'll be able to find this on our website, which is archergallery.space. And to find out more about Marne, it's kind of small up there, but
it's just marnelucas.com.
Easy peasy. Welcome, Marne.
Good morning. The reason you don't hear me talking about my art a lot is I really avoid public speaking. And so when Kendra asked me to do it, getting out of my comfort zone, I said yes. This is just a little technical jargon. I do a lot of infrared thermal video work. And technically, it's called incident energy. So it's a measurement of energy or of heat striking a surface. So I don't know if you guys remember this Boston bombing image from a few years ago. That little white glowing figure is a person hiding under a tarp. And so the Boston Police Department was able to find that person using this heat sensitive imaging technology. So it's used a lot for border aerial surveillance. It's, it's a very military use technology. This is what the color setting looks like for like veterinary or medical imaging. You see this a lot on Instagram. I don't use this setting. It's really beautiful, but it's a little psychedelic and cartoony for the work that I'm trying to do. Not that I don't love this. So infrared thermography, it shows subtle actual details in heat that we can't see with the human eye. So anything that's really dark or black is cold or wet, and the white areas are hot. And the reason I like to use this sort of military technology is I'm really interested in talking about transformation of life. And I like this idea that, it looks like we're made out of glowing stars or like we're made out of a constellation. So here you see this image of a woman. She's just wearing a piece of fabric, and you can see all the capillaries in her body sort of sprouting. And Carl Sagan said we were made out of star stuff. We're a way for the universe to know itself. So I like this idea of tying, that we come from stardust, and then we, are on this earth in our bodies, and eventually return perhaps to stardust. So I've been using this technology since 1995. My earlier work was always about intimacy and the body and sexuality. And then as, I'm now 56, I'm now postmenopausal. Like my interests have really shifted over time. So my work used to always be about like fertility and intimacy. And now it's sort of shifting towards death and dying and transformation. So my own interests are sort of shaped by my, what my own life cycle. I have a series called Quietus. And this is where I take the infrared thermal video stills and make prints, and then I embellish them with gold or silver or copper leaf. My other job is I'm an End of Life Doula, so I assist the dying. I also help the clients' families. So it's a non-medical role to advocate for the needs of the dying. And in this country, most death is pretty medicalized. A lot of folks die in a white hospital room. We doulas, our goal is to help shift that towards people being able to be at home or be in the space they want to be in. So being a doula for the last 10 years has also shifted my work. So now I'm mining my own video footage for these images because it's really hard to get a hold of this technology. I have very sporadic access once every few years, usually through friends working for various state departments who are sort of surreptitiously handing me a suitcase. I am a long-time prankster, and the idea of sort of usurping military technology to make these kind of feminist narratives gets me very excited. The biggest thing that has shifted for me, hi, welcome, come on in. The biggest shift for me in being a doula is, the more I work with death and dying, the less I can say I know what is happening in a way. Like I know physically what is transpiring with people going through the dying process. But it's a pretty mystical experience. I have been on multiple births and deaths, and all I can say is that I have felt the exact same tremendous sort of vibration in the room and this like burst of energy. And for me, that energy is love. And yes, there's physics and gravity holding the universe together, but for me, it really feels like love is what's keeping everything together. And so that's something I'm also trying to explore in this infrared thermal video work and 2D works. So now I'm sort of collaging a lot of my video stills because I also need ways to keep reworking my material because I have a limited amount of footage that I can shoot every few years. So you can find all of my short films on my website, but here I'm focusing on the 2D work. And it's a really intuitive process. I don't really sketch things out in advance. It's very meditative for me to sit and collage. It's something I've done since I was a kid. And those are me. Those angry-looking witchy characters. So it's a lot of self-portraiture. I started as a photographer, and I made a lot of self-portraits because I was too shy to ask people to pose for me. And so anything I needed, I would shoot myself. It took me a long time before I started reaching out to other people to photograph them. Almost all of this footage has been shot in Hawaii. Actually, one of my Maui ohana is here, Martha. So I've had a friend that I house sit for who's a plant scientist and who's been surreptitiously giving me access to this gear. And I go out in very remote locations to film lava landscapes and nature and waterfalls. Something I'm really exploring right now is the maternal and the eternal. I myself do not have kids, but I'm the consummate auntie. I think that big auntie energy is why I'm able to be an End of Life Doula and guide people. It's like I get to put all that maternal energy into that work. But this is something that's been coming up for the last 5 years for me. And anytime I'm in nature, or I don't know if you guys feel like when you're working on something you really enjoy and you lose yourself in it and you lose all time and you're in that flow state, I don't always get to that state, but when I'm in it, this theme of maternal and eternal just keeps coming back to me. So that's something I'm working on right now. This is my friend Cara Griffin from Maui, and she appears in a lot of this imagery. So these figures here, those are all her. My friends know when I come to Maui that they're going to have to go on road trips with me and film really wacky stuff, and I travel with a car full of props. You've seen my props. I have all kinds of crazy stuff. But this woman is a yoga practitioner. She herself is a visual artist and does a lot of intuitive movement. So her process, being in her body, really informs what I'm filming and sort of the themes of the work I'll be making in the future. So it's this long-distance collaboration. I think I mentioned this earlier, I use 24 karat gold and copper and silver on the backgrounds of my imagery, and that's to allude to, either past or, current uses of precious metals. They can be used for technology, but also in spiritual healing. I bet you know a lot about that, yeah? This is Mother Universe. So, trigger warning, there's birth happening in the center there. On the left, you see a woman who's 9 months pregnant. That's her belly. And you can see where the hands are cold because they're dark. And then the belly is sort of modeled because there's different areas of heating and cooling. Then you have a hospital birth in the middle. And I know. That trigger warning is for me, right? Yeah, it's for everybody. And then on the right, you see the veins in the breasts. So it looks like the energy is going in from the mother into the baby, which it is in the form of both love and caloric energy for breast milk. But I love how this technology really seems to illustrate like energy fields. And in the backgrounds, I use a lot of NASA, SDO, lunar and planetary and solar imagery. And I'm also kind of working on this idea of a future feminist sort of universe that is far more inclusive than what we have now. So it's sort of it's my way of like painting my happy place. These are all portraits I made in Portland. I was living in New York City for 16 years, and then I moved back after a death in my family in the past year. But I was doing a public art project in my neighborhood in Harlem, and I had a bunch of imagery, but it just wasn't appropriate to my neighborhood. I was in Harlem the whole 16 years. I lived in New York. So I was doing a public art project, and because I had access here, I had to fly back from New York and film folks here, and I just needed a lot more BIPOC folks, and it couldn't be all nudes of, beautiful women on Maui. Like, that was not going to be appropriate to my community in Harlem. So these are just some of the portraits I made while I was here. I have a breakdancer, Jen Fuller, who's a glass artist holding a glass paper plane with her kiln, which is white hot. I have a jingle dancer, who's my friend Martina. So these are images that they're for a public art project in New York, and I'd love to be able to do something with them out here. This is meant to be funny. I do have a ridiculous sense of humor, and being a doula, like an end of life doula, and dealing with death and dying all the time, you have to sort of shake it off. And so I was in an exhibition called Spa Core, which was about making fun of the wellness industry, because the Western wellness industry has co-opted a lot of indigenous traditions. And so I was in this exhibition, and it was all about the body and beauty and wellness culture. So I made a short film, I'll show you here, called Chthonic Fatigue Syndrome, which is a play on words. Chthonic is meaning underground. And this film's actually going to be playing in LA on Thursday as part of a feminist video night. So I'm using like B-roll footage from my films, and I had enough footage that I could make this like very hilarious short film about, it's sort of like this underworld goth spa, and I filmed it as like an infomercial from the future, and it's really, it's very dry and funny. Here's a Goddess Universe, Cosmic Cliffs. And again, those are all figures from background, from various footage. I think I mentioned I am postmenopausal. I went through that quite early. I've been invited, based on my short films, I've been invited to be in a few shows and exhibitions and talks in Europe about hormones. And so I've been in a couple film festivals. This was an art exhibition and book project. And so I explored my life cycle. It was basically a visual essay of hormones using my infrared thermal imagery. So that's progesterone on the upper left. On the right is oxytocin between the mother and baby. testosterone with the man and woman, and then estradiol. I actually used the wrong chemical. It was supposed to be estrogen, and I put this in as estradiol, and I recently gave a talk, and there was a gentleman in the audience. He was like, excuse me, you actually used estradiol and not estrogen. Which he remembered from college chemistry. This is another film I made called Hot Flash, also filmed on Maui. That was for Transitional States, Hormones at the Crossroads of Art and Science, and that was a tour all over the UK and Europe. I was the only project that made art about menopause, which is something that nobody talks about, and lots of folks are going to be going through it. Got to get on board. These are all landscapes filmed on Maui. This is the first film I made. If I had to say, I made a senior thesis project for art school. I did not go to school. I'm a self-taught artist. This would have been it. This was from 1995, and a friend of mine and I made an explicit sci-fi patient-surgeon short film. It radically changed my life. I ended up going on a film festival circuit all over the country and all over Europe presenting this film, and I did not consider myself an artist. But through, after being on tour for 2 years with this film, and it garnered many, many awards, I had to finally accept the responsibility that I was, in fact, an artist. So this was sort of my coming out as an artist. And when we obtained this technology, we basically misrepresented ourselves to a major military contractor. And I said that I was going to make a music video. I was like, I'm in Portland, Oregon. Nike's here, Adidas. We have all these sports culture. So I kind of spun this yarn to this military contractor, like, if you rent this camera to me, I'll give you some footage and you could market to other artists. And they were like, well, we don't have a marketing department and it's not for rent. So they lent it to us, which was pretty nerve-wracking because then we were going to have to send it to the next military contractor base. And of course I wasn't going to give them explicit footage. So I went to a park and filmed people rollerblading, walking their dogs. I had a belly dancer and like a male go-go dancer that we like threw water on them and then put a fan on them so that they would change like, colors, and sent them this dummy footage, which was pretty terrible because it was last minute. They then said, lose our number. You will go to jail. They were really pissed because they think they realized that they had fallen for like a ruse, and I pretended I was a student. So I knew what I was making, and years later they figured out who we were. And I think they're all fanboys of this material, but they're still not going to help me. So after making this, I am blackballed from all of these companies that make this technology because they're about my age. This technology came out right around the first Gulf War. So 94, 95, this technology was being like really used. It was developed before that. There was limited versions in the 70s. But I've tried using different names, genders, they always figure out it's me. And they're like, we know it's you. We're not going to help you. And I'm like, I'm not going to repeat this, obviously. That was like 30 years ago. So we went through sort of the infrared thermal video work, which that video series is called Transmundane. And then this is the work I do. I collaborate with terminally ill artists to do legacy projects. So it's kind of where my work as an artist and an end-of-life doula come together. Bardo is the Tibetan term for the space between death and rebirth, but I'm using that term metaphorically. If you're living your life, great. You have this idea of who you are and what you want in life. When you're given a terminal diagnosis, you're no longer living the life prior, right? Because now you have this like knowledge that everything's going to change and your life is going to be decreased significantly. And you're not dead yet. So you're in this in-between stage. And like that gets very medicalized and people's health is declining and everyone treats you very fragile, like you're an egg that's going to break. And what I want to do with artists who have these diagnoses is figure out how do you make that time period between the diagnosis and their passing really vibrant and really special. So I've been doing this project for about almost 10 years now. This is my first collaborator, Chris Brunkart. Today would have been his birthday. I've had to talk about this work for so many years, and I'm usually fine. I just had an exhibition that ended last week, and I was able to show his work. We went on this crazy Iceland trip, so he got a stage 4 colon cancer diagnosis while we were all living in New York. He was an Oregon artist, and we all happened to be in New York. And so I accompanied he and his husband on their honeymoon and drove them in a camper van all over Iceland so that he could make his last body of landscape photos. So here's one of them. And he fell terribly ill on this trip. And, you know, it was really difficult because, like, I'm in a van with 2 very tall dudes. You know, we don't know where we're going. We just have, like, a paper map, and he's getting terribly ill on the trip. But he was such a badass. He wanted to make art at all costs because that's how he wanted to spend his time before he passed. So on the right is my portrait of him. And this is from the exhibition that happened last month at Portland Arts Collective. So it's pretty vindicating because this work was sitting on a hard drive for 9 years. When he got sick in Iceland, we got him stabilized. He was hospitalized for about 3 weeks. We got him back to the US, and he was able to edit and produce a coffee table book of his work, which you'll see later. And so he focused on showing his work he made in New York. He lived there for a year with his partner at the time. So finally now I've moved back to Oregon. His widowed husband, Zeke, still lives in Portland, and I was able to get a regional arts and culture grant, and I was able to produce this work. So here's an exhibition view. And then I have some of my sculptures peppered throughout the gallery because I made these right after he died. I did a residency at the John Michael Kohler Art Center. I think you guys have heard of Kohler toilets and bathtubs and sinks. That's the program I did. So this is a sculpture I made for my dad who died when I was 28. I did this tree conch fungus. This is Gullfoss Falls in Iceland by Chris Brunkart. The landscape shot through the van window. It was August and it rained and was 50 degrees every day. It was brutal and beautiful. It was my only time I'd been to Iceland. These are some photos by Chris and a view of the gallery. This is, for me, the most powerful image of these grasses in the wind and rain, and you can see there's some dots on the lens of water droplets. He became incredibly sick, and Chris was, you know, throwing up blood and really in bad shape, and we were in the middle of nowhere, and we had to call their version of 911, and while we were waiting for the ambulance to arrive, and we were in the middle of nowhere, there's nothing for miles. He left us, lit a cigarette, and just went down into the ditch, into this grassy field, and he was like down on the ground, crouching down, taking these photos, and I thought, what is he doing? Like, this could be his last moments. And I think he was contemplating that. Like, we didn't know if he was going to make it to the hospital or back to the United States. He had been on the road for 6 weeks. He had been away from chemotherapy, and he was, you know, actively dying. And so he took this photograph, and when I found this on the hard drive, I knew I had to print this image. And that's Zeke and I, his husband and I, right when the ambulance pulled up. This is his self-portrait in the ambulance. And I wanted to juxtapose this with the photo on the right. He was a very famous snowboard photographer in the 90s, and he was also a self-taught artist. And so he was used to, like, jumping out of helicopters and vans and living, you know, really rugged conditions in a van, and he never minded, like, extreme weather, snow, cold. So he had this pretty special life before he passed away at age 47, just after his 47th birthday. This is the book that he put out, Borderless Space, and this is his photos of the time he lived in New York. It was a limited edition of 150 copies. And then this is some of the workshops that I do. When I have a gallery space, I love the idea of disrupting the gallery so it's not just for art viewing and making it a community space. So I had 6 workshops last month on Saturdays at the gallery. So I had this woman, Lana Sumi, did rituals of remembrance and helped people create rituals to think about people they've lost. And this is my friend Jamie Thrower on the right. She's on Instagram as Queer Grief Doula. And she did a really great workshop on special considerations for end-of-life care for the queer community. Even if you have your healthcare all lined up with your partner, after someone passes, your birth family can come in and alter all of the plans you had in place. And so sometimes folks get misgendered, or they're put in a pink dress, even though they never would have worn that, you know, in the casket. There's a lot of things that happen after death that kind of revert back to the family. So there's a lot of like paperwork you can have in place to make sure that doesn't happen. This is my grief collage workshop, which was a total party. I had 40 people crammed in the gallery. They were on the floor, all over the tables. We also had a community altar on the bottom right that folks could just move around and change throughout the day. It was really fun, and it was like multi-generational. There's some more photos. And people were really focused on what they were doing. We had little prompts that people could randomly select to meditate on about grief or loss or transformation. And then I provide all the materials. They're all free. And so I have like really fancy fine art books, and I let everybody cut up these gorgeous books. And I want people to have like, you know, exceptionally beautiful materials to start with, to be inspired by, because it's not easy to confront your grief in a space with lots of people you don't know and then feel like you have this pressure of having to make something beautiful. I had a Corda Music Thanatology School come, and that is prescriptive voice and harp at the end of life. They play a lot of songs in Latin, and it is incredibly powerful. You can feel the vibration of these harps and their voice like in your body. And when people are dying, the last thing to go is the hearing. So even if someone's non-responsive and you think they're not there, they can still hear, which as a doula, I'm always having to guide families like, hey, could you not fight right next to them? Like, they actually hear you. And I also ask people to like come up with a playlist. Like, what would be your playlist that would sum up your whole life? Like, you start with 10 songs, and then all of a sudden you have 20, and then you have 50, and then you get to like 110, and you're like, whoa, this is a really long playlist. But if you think of who you are as a person to sum up your sort of arc of your whole life, your music taste changes over time, and you have different songs that have different meanings. But I always ask folks to make their own playlist. This is the gallery director, Aurora Josephson, on the right, and she uses her voice as an instrument, and then she has dry ice that she uses different kinds of metal objects and pours like a tea kettle of boiling water onto the objects in the dry ice, and there's a contact mic underneath. And so it's really eerie, beautiful sounds. We had a death meditation, and I dedicated it to a chef in Portland, Naomi Pomeroy, who she drowned this summer very unexpectedly in the Willamette River, and she was somebody I used to work for. Really, really special, like champion of women in the culinary industry. And so we encourage folks to share recipes as another sort of legacy project you could do with your own family. Like, everybody loves food. So sharing those kind of traditions in your family is a nice way to kind of like have conversations about legacy and end-of-life care planning. This is another one of my collaborators, Manuel Piscina. We did an exhibition. I brought him to New York, and we were able to show his photo series, Deidades, of Mesoamerican deities. And he found me through Facebook. And he's like, do you really collaborate with dying artists? And I was like, I sure do. So we had some mutual friends, and I flew down to Dallas to meet him. And while I was there, his first grandson was born early, very unexpectedly. And so I was able to be there for that and photograph his first moments with his son and his first grandson. He has idiopathic lung disease and did not ever want a lung transplant, and he outlived his disease process by several years. And I kind of wondered when he had, you know, not just one grandson, then he had a little granddaughter like a year later, 2 years later. And he called me up one day about a year ago and he goes, hey, am I kicked out of your project if I change my mind and want to get, you know, fresh lung smell? And I said, no, you're not kicked out, because like we're all going to die eventually, right? So he got a lung transplant. He actually did a lot of hard work to qualify, and he got a lung transplant in April. And now he's doing fabulously. He feels better than he's felt in years. So now we're kind of on hiatus, but he's still being an artist in Dallas. And I'm super proud of him. Like, it's good to get kicked out of my project. And these are just some images from the arts industry program at Kohler Co. Factory. This is in Sheboygan, Wisconsin. I normally do photography and 2D work and video. This was the first time I'd ever made molds or done anything so burly. I was in 2 months in the foundry and 2 months in the porcelain side of the factory. And it was like, I went on this residency just like 2 weeks after my friend Chris Brunkart died. So I came home, helped with the memorial, funeral, flew back to New York, packed, and then went to Wisconsin for 4 months. So it was sort of like grief camp in the Wizard of Oz. I mean, I was in this factory setting, working like 20-hour days. It's sort of like being in a Henry Ford, like, mechanized situation where, like, there's always these molten objects coming through the factory, through your studio. I mean, it's like you're always on high alert, in a hard hat. It was pretty intense, but it was really the best place for me to be, because I could just sit in my grief and figure out what I was going to do with it and what I was going to make. And I wanted to just make symbols about death and transformation. So I made this Ouroboros, which is a primitive symbol of the snake eating its own tail. But to add a little bit of levity, I used like kids' stuffed toy snakes and made them all blingy. I like glued all those thumbtacks onto like a stuffed snake to cast. And this is a bird bath I made out of one of Kohler's sinks. And you're expected to pick up the processes pretty quickly. Like, they will help you put things on the line, but you really have to figure out like mold making and casting pretty fast. This is a piece I did on the ceramic side called Departed Grandmothers, Aprons and Skulls. So I found these like really funny pickle dishes, and it's supposed to be like a belly apron with the little boob lids that you lift them. And as I was altering these and glazing them and making them very fleshy, I noticed when the little lids were off and the dish was turned upside down, it looked a little bit like a fetal skull. So I then added the jawline to make it more like an adult skull. And so I'm just recasting the same object, but sort of altering it. So it's like, you know, fertility and death in the same piece. But it was also about my fear of death and dying, and my fear of, like, my folks are from the Midwest, from Minnesota, and I watched my mom try to emancipate herself from a very sort of patriarchal, like, Midwest kind of ideal. I have some anxiety about that, and, you know, I'm pretty resistant to it. So this is sort of like a humorous piece I made about that. But also, grandmothers hold all the knowledge, right? Grandmothers hold, like, plant knowledge and medicine knowledge and family stories and histories, and when they go, a lot of times that goes with them if we're not, like, paying attention and trying to learn from our grandmothers. This is trans floors, and these are inspired by my friend Pippa Garner. She actually made this t-shirt for me. It says, "Support faith-based cage fighting." She's a total prankster. She's 83 and lives in Long Beach, California. And when she was Philip Garner, he worked in Detroit in a car factory. So while I was in my residency for 4 months, Pippa was my lifeline, because Pippa knew exactly what it was like to be in that kind of intense setting day after day. And so I made this huge assembly of all these different, like, sort of transgendered flowers of all different sizes, and they're all, like, fleshy. And I love work about the body, and this is sort of my abstraction of the body. This is Pippa. This is a portrait of her. Her shirt says, "Meet my tits, perky and jiggles." At age 51, she transitioned to become a woman, and never because she felt like she was born in the wrong body. Philip Garner was like this artist, cyclist, hacker, inventor, tinkerer, very successful California artist, and felt like they were kind of a real jerk. And they used to work for Rolling Stone magazine. They were very well known and secretly started tinkering with their body chemistry by taking hormones. They were taking female hormones. Over time, everybody's like, oh, Philip, you're so much easier to be around. You're so much more sensitive. You're so much nicer. And they just kept sort of gender hacking over time, getting augmentation, and then finally deciding to have a full sex change. And so Pippa is 6'7", tattooed. Those are real tattoos on their body. It's a tattooed bra, satin bra, and a G-string with Monopoly money. And it was Pippa's idea to put that giant centipede coming out from under the tire on the left, working on the car. That car is her neighbor's car who so he's always threatening her harm for being trans. And so, of course, she's like, let's use that car for the photo. And then Philip Garner, back when Pippa was Philip Garner, they had this catalog. It was a very kitschy pop art catalog called Philip Garner's Catalog for Better Living. And that was a roller skate they invented in 1968, which is the year I was born. And I now have that tattoo on my calf. I always loved that sculpture. I had a postcard of it in high school, and then I never knew that I would end up meeting this person, and they're like my family now. So that's a tattoo of her sculpture. Pippa is now finally getting her sort of just dues. She's been in major museum exhibitions all over the country for the past 2 years. There are 2 young curators in New York City that are really championing her work. And so she's like in every biennial and has been in every magazine in the last 2 years. So I'm really happy for Pippa because this has been a long, like once Pippa transitioned, they became sort of culturally invisible. They were ahead of the whole, gender curve. And so it's really good to see this trans elder get her sort of like just desserts. This is from a self-portrait series. Again, I made this on Maui. That's sort of my home away from home. And this was a billboard for Queer Futures. And that was in LA in 2020. And that's that. And if you go to my website, you can find a lot of the video projects. It's called Transmundane. You can go there and see the short films. All my films are short film projects. Yeah. Anybody have any questions? I get very excited about death and dying. I know it's a lot, but we're all heading there, and I am a fierce advocate. So I apologize if it's triggering for folks to have to sit here and listen to end of life care. But I'm such a cheerleader for it. Yes?
I have a question. So being a doula, you're around death a lot. How do you take care of yourself and not let absorb all the heavy emotions that are
I'm the worst at self-care. I'm terrible. I mean, I would say that in general, going to Maui in the summers, I house sit for plant scientists or artists, and I would go there for a month or two, and of course I would film and make art and do all kinds of crazy projects while I'm there. But going there and being in the ocean, I was born in Hawaii and then raised here since I was 2.5. So my whole adult life, I didn't really believe that was my place. Going there and crying into the ocean, putting the salt back into the ocean is the most healing thing for me. Being in nature is really healing. But I'm terrible. I don't meditate. I don't go do self-care. I'm right now I'm white knuckling it a little bit because I just finished this art exhibition with Chris's work. And I am working with a writer right now who is, he just texted me right before the lecture, was like, I'm going to the VA hospital, things are progressing faster than we would like. And so a lot of my plans get put on hold and kind of usurped by other people's dying process, but this is really the work I was meant to be doing. It's I finally figured out what I was going to be when I grow up. So I don't know if that answers your question, but nature is the most grounding thing for me. I'm a busybody, so it's hard for me to schedule time off, and I've been freelance my whole life, so I've never had a Monday through Friday life or regular holiday schedule. It's just sort of yeah, but usually nature. Yeah. I don't practice the things I tell other people to do as a doula. You know, I'm like, you must get self-care. And they're like, what do you do? And I'm like, nothing. Anyone else? Yes, Rodolfo.
This part of your helping artists, photographers, and probably other artists do their legacies at the end of their life. Have you thought about your own legacy, since you're so-called the expert leading others, and now you said what you said about not taking care of yourself so great? Have you thought about your own legacy?
My legacy is the Bardo Project. I mean, as soon as I started doing this project, I knew in my gut 10 years ago, like, this project with dying artists, that is my legacy. I really think, like, I've always been an artist and an activist, and I've never differentiated between the two. And now, like, people's like, oh, what kind of art do you do? And I always say, I'm an artist and an end-of-life doula. Like, I can't separate those things. But I do think the Bardo Project is my legacy. That and pranks.
First of all, thank you. That was awesome. You're wearing a lot of different hats.
Yeah.
And you're very successful. Do you have any advice for people that are just starting out, artists, student artists? Any, like, professional?
Sure. I've learned everything the hard way. I mean, I'm a visual learner. I'm only now acknowledging, like, my own neurodivergence. And it's been a real reckoning. I'm glad I'm a self-taught artist, but I will say, like, don't do what I did. I mean, because for one, like, I don't teach, so my day job now is, you know, I do a lot of portrait photography, and I'm an end-of-life doula, which is intense. Like, that's an intense job, and then to have your artistic practice be also involved with that. Professionally, I think I'm always in the process of learning. I never feel like I've graduated from anything because I never had those markers of, like, you go to college and then you go to grad school and then, you know. It's like, for me, I'm always a learning process. I'm kind of love that learning curve, and I learn in a very steep learning curve. But the thing I've done for kind of career development is applying for grants. I mean, all of my friends know that a good 30% of my lifestyle is applying for stuff. It's probably more. It's probably more like 40%. But applying for art shows, grants, residencies, you know, career development workshops. It really helps you hone what you're doing. Like, every grant proposal, I'm like, oh, I didn't realize I could explain it that way. Or I really learn a lot about myself and my process of what I'm trying to convey. I guess it's a little cart before the horse, and it says something about how I learn, but a lot of times having to navigate those processes of applying for things really helps me figure out what I'm doing and who I'm trying to reach and who my audience is. And like you were saying, successful, and immediately I was like, you know, I don't make a living at my art, but I really push myself. I push myself outside of my comfort level. And, like, you know, living in New York City, could not afford to be taking a whole bunch of classes to learn all the skills that I have. I just dive feet first. I apply for residency, and then I get in, and I'm like, oh my God, what have I done? Like, now I got to figure out how to use all these tools and do all this stuff. But that's how I learn. And so I kind of choose. Like, my next thing I'm trying to work on is some virtual reality stuff, and somebody lent me a headset, and I mean, I just started crying and just put it in the closet for 3 months because I was like, it's a whole new thing to learn. But I really want to start working with virtual reality because some artists, like the person I'm working with right now, they're declining so quickly, we're having a hard time putting together a book for them. And I think it might be interesting to try to build worlds for each artist. Right? So that in the future, their family members or future family members that aren't even here yet can get to know them through, like, a virtual world. And prior to that, I was very, like, VR and AR and AI. Like, I kind of go kicking and screaming into the next technology. And then I'm like, okay, there's something to that. If I'm afraid of it, it means I should be doing it. So that's the next thing I'm trying to tackle is, like, how to work with virtual reality for the Bardo project. Thank you.